Well, it's my lucky day because I've finally been able to get hold of a person I've been trying to get hold of for a while. We talk on the phone every once in a while, and I've been saying, listen, let's get this blog going and find out exactly what is happening with our recreational fishery right now, what will be the opportunities in the future, and what have we been able to accomplish since we heard the minister's announcement on the closures. So I'm with Martin Paishe, and Martin Paishe is one of the directors with the Sport Fishing Institute of BC, and he is very, very involved not only with Sport Fishing BC but also with communication with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. So let's just talk a little bit here, Martin. First of all, it's sure great to have you on the phone here, if not in person.
Well, sorry I couldn't make it, Gary, but as you know, there's a lot going on these days, and we're working very hard to try and see what we can do to create a little bit more opportunity for recreational fishermen in southern BC.
Now, I've noticed that since the announcement came out, I think you are making some inroads. Have they not made some changes in Port Renfrew?
Yeah, and this is something that in the press release that came out as a result of these Chinook restrictions that everyone's struggling with right now, there was an opportunity identified that where areas could be identified where there was zero impact on stocks of concern, and where First Nations food, social, and ceremonial fisheries could be undertaken. That they would consider opening up areas to retention of Chinook. In specific geographic areas. So one of the areas we've been able to get that done is a 1 nautical mile corridor along the west coast of Vancouver Island, and area 21, which is sort of around the Nitnat Lake area, basically from Vanilla Point to Pachina Point on the west coast of Vancouver Island, that enables some opportunity for people to retain fish, and particularly that area 21 opening is quite important for the community of Port Renfrew, which is really dependent upon sport fishing tourism activity as a cornerstone of its economy. So working very carefully with DFO and using particularly DNA data and that type of thing, DNA data that was provided by local charter guides in the area over the last few years. Again, in working closely with DFO, we were able to identify a spot where we're not going to be able to, we're not impacting stocks of concern, and therefore a fishery can go ahead. And so over the next little while, next few weeks, we're going to look at other areas such as the mainland inlets on the eastern side of the Strait of Georgia, possibly look at somewhere like Howe Sound or inside Vancouver Harbor. But all of this stuff takes a fair amount of analysis and data compilation. But it's our opportunity to identify no impacts of stocks of concern, work with DFO, work with local First Nations, and see if we can't take a surgical approach to what we're doing here rather than use this blunt instrument of coastwide non-retention.
Yeah, and you're very involved with this. I mean, so involved that they're flying you to Ottawa for consultation as well. So I hear you're heading there pretty quick, I guess, are you?
Yeah, I mean, the Sport Fishing Institute of BC does this regularly, and we will fly over to Ottawa. It's part of what the SFI does, is a combination of working quite closely with federal bureaucrats at all different levels, and then heading back to Ottawa to make sure that we can get the message out about the value and the importance and the relevance of the sport fishery to people within the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and to politicians on all sides of the house. The Sport Fishing Institute of BC is nonpartisan, but we make it a very, very important mission of ours to head back east and make sure that people who represent the Canadian public understand how important the sport fishery is to both our country and specifically to British Columbia.
Yeah, one of the things I really find interesting is the idea where you're talking about DNA samples and opening up around the Nitnat. I guess that won't come all the way down to Camper Creek and Port Renfrew, will it? That area will still be closed, like coming out of Port Renfrew, will it?
I can't say for sure one way or another. I do know that work is going on to try and see what we can do about those areas. So I can't say conclusively one way or the other on that one. I don't want to close the door on it, but I don't want to build up false expectations either.
You know, and talking about expectations, it's quite interesting, and I really like this idea of looking at the DNA, and I think that's why it's so important to have good catch data, and for the guides and people who are out there professionally fishing, that they have record books that they can record their catches and get DNA samples so that we can actually find out what the heck is really going on. I know in the past a lot of guides didn't want to do catch record books because they always felt that they were giving away their secrets of their success to the Department of Fisheries of Oceans, but how wrong they were. DFO apparently just really wants that DNA information to find out what the hell is happening to our fish and where they're going and where they're coming from.
Yeah, we've been working really closely with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and with local guides on the west coast of Vancouver Island is our most recent project. We've also done this out of the Campbell River area, Port Hardy area, and now we're moving forward in implementing a coastwide program on catch monitoring through the guide and charter fleet that involves the use of catch logs and in specific areas. DNA sampling is a very important project, but it can also be quite expensive. But in specific areas, to use DNA analysis to get a better fix on stock composition over time. Stock composition is basically what kind of salmon are available in an area when. We know that there's what's called a mixed stock fishery takes place in most coastal waters, and it's absolutely important as we get into this era of weak stock management, which is really what these Chinook restrictions are all about, is the government of Canada, and I personally believe myself that we have a responsibility to protect endangered stocks. And what I'm troubled with this year is that we have the ability to do that surgically rather than, again, with this blunt instrument. So DNA analysis gives us the opportunity to do that in a much more specific way. I also happen to believe, having been involved in the tourism side of sport fishing, running lodges, being a guide myself, working with charter operators, that those people like lodges and charter operators have a greater responsibility to do this. And not only is it sort of a greater responsibility based on the fact that they're people who make their living from the act of fishing and taking people out fishing and that type of thing, but there's also a legal requirement to do it. If anyone wants to, pull out your fishing license and your 2019 fishing license, and underneath all of the stuff where you record your catch, you'll see what's called condition of licenses. And the very first one is a condition of license that indicates that it's actually your legal obligation to provide catch data if asked for from a representative of the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. So we've been working closely with the guide fleet to help them understand that really you don't need to use that legal hammer, that in reality it's actually your responsibility as a professional fisherman, and it's good for your business to keep accurate catch records, to do DNA and biosampling. And in this case, particularly 2019, we can be confident that the corridor on the west coast of Vancouver Island, PFMA 21, and then other areas that we'll move into, it was DNA evidence that really put that over the top. So.
Now, this brings up a really interesting point with me, is that all of a sudden we're proving DNA and that to open up areas, yet here on our southern coast in the Straits of Juan de Fuca, people are not allowed to catch hatchery fish. Now, we do know for a fact that those hatchery fish are not from the Fraser River, and yet it's closed. So maybe there's going to be a precedent set here. I don't know, but it just makes sense to me that if it's being proven that fish on the west coast are not going into the Fraser, then why in the heck are we not allowed to catch hatchery fish on the Straits of Juan de Fuca, which we also know are not going into the Fraser River now? I think that maybe there's some politics being played here, which I'm sure there is, and we don't have to get into that today because this blog can only last so long, but it's really food for thought. It's something I'd like to talk to you next week when you get back. So I'd really like to thank you for spending the time on this blog. We've wanted to get together, and we're going to carry on with this conversation with the Straits of Juan de Fuca. And if you don't mind ending on that note, Martin, I'd like to really thank you for spending some time.
It's my pleasure to help participate. And, a motivation that I have as somebody that's been invested in this in a long time is to make sure that people are dealing with as much factual information as possible. Every angler has an opinion, but there are facts about the way these things have unfolded. And I think the more that we focus on facts and evidence and that type of thing, I think it's just better for everyone. Sometimes we're not going to like those facts. Sometimes the reality of what's going on out there isn't something that we really want to think about a lot. I mean, the fact that there are 7 critically endangered stocks of Chinook on the Fraser River is a tough pill to swallow. But as a guy who's been fishing all my life and a guy who wants to watch my children and grandchildren enjoy fishing, I want to be able to do my part to help recover those fish in a meaningful manner. And our talk next time about marked selective fisheries and what they can mean to the future of not just Juan de Fuca Strait, but other areas in British Columbia is an excellent way to move forward. So I look forward to it.
Well, thanks, Martin, and have a good time in Ottawa. You're going to miss this lovely West Coast weather that we have. And then the other thing, too, I would really like to say to a lot of you people out there that, the Sport Fishing Institute has some very, very dedicated people. Martin Paishe and Rob Alcock, and there's a lot of people there that are doing a lot of hard work, and they need your support. Not only your support in just looking and listening to what they're saying, but also your support financially, because it's a long road ahead of us, and we're going to need all the help we can get. So thank you, Martin. We'll talk to you next week, and we've got a new agenda coming up on the Straits of Juan de Fuca that we can talk about. Take care and have a good flight.
Thank you.